Hello, welcome to the 21st episode of the DraftCast. This time will be a slightly different episode as we can't ignore the football news that is currently going on right now. So we will be focusing on the European Super League. And I'm joined by Jack Farthing, manager of Roque Santanudes. How are you doing, Jack?
Hello, Luke. I'm very well. Very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm really good, thanks. I'm really looking forward to this episode, I have to admit. I think it's going to be,
been probably the craziest 48 hours of my life as a football fan.
Yeah. So even though it appears this Super League is not going to happen now, I think it's still worth doing an episode on it and talking through the what-ifs and consequences that could have been. I mean, who knows? It may still happen in some way or another, so this could still be a valid exercise. I think it is fair to say neither of us are true experts on this, but I'm hoping, Jack, that you can be the expert for us today, and I can represent a football fan that doesn't know the ins and outs of how these European leagues operate, but enjoy watching football enough to know why this Super League is getting so much bad press. So, do you think you could do a bit of an intro on the Super League for us? I think we should leave our opinions till later on and try and approach as neutral as possible for now, although I do think our conversations may give away our opinions quite quickly, but we'll see what happens.
Yes, I'll try to kind of come across as neutral as I can and kind of talk about it factually first, and as you say, we can kind of go over what we think about it towards the end. As an introduction, I'm sure that everyone knows, on Monday, 12 of Europe's biggest clubs announced they're going to be breaking away to make a European Super League. There was the big six, as it were, from England, which is Man United, Man City, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool and Tottenham, joined by three of Serie A, Italy's biggest clubs, Juventus, Inter Milan, AC Milan, including as well three of Spain's biggest clubs, which was Real Madrid, Barcelona and Atletico. So there was 12 founding clubs. There was rumours that another three were going to be joining, and the aim was to have 20 in total, with 15 fixed members and 5 rotating members. Another fixed members couldn't get relegated, so a closed shop approach. And those 5, although not divulged how, the additional 5 would then kind of rotate out, people assume, based on performance in other competitions or league or whatever it may be. And now the rumour of the other 3 was that it was going to be Porto, Bayern and Leipzig. However, all 3 kind of quickly came out and pushed back on it. And the competition itself was intended to mirror the Champions League, which is obviously Europe's biggest competition at the moment, arguably the biggest club competition in the world, running from August to May with 2 10-man groups with knockouts and a final. That's just obviously a very quick introduction as to what was planned. But as you say, much has happened since.
Yes. So I thought it might be a good idea to do a bit of a Q&A. I've prepared some questions that are from my perspective, which, to be honest, is quite limited when it comes, like I've said, to the runnings of these European, other European leagues. And hopefully I might ask something that people may not think of straight away when reading about this Super League. I had prepared the questions before the news of the Super League that it may not be happening. But I'll carry on as if it is for now. Because like I said,
sounds good.
We haven't had, I don't think, the actual announcement that it's not happening. So at time of recording, that is. Who knows in the next 24 hours.
Definitely. No, that sounds good.
So as a Coventry City fan, who are currently in the Championship, how do you think this Super League would have affected the English leagues, including the Premier League and below? A lot of people are saying it's going to hurt grassroots football, but aren't these teams still able to invest in training youth players and buying players from teams from any of the league levels?
So that's quite a tricky one to come at as a neutral, obviously, straight away, right off the bat. But so the main issue is, obviously, if these clubs did go and play, there's 2 strains of thought here. One, in their world, in their dream world, is they're allowed to carry on playing in domestic competitions, they would still remain part of the Premier League. However, then if that happens and they can't, there's no motivation for them to do well in that league because they're playing in a bigger league worth more money that they can't get relegated from, where is their motivation to play a strong team? So, for example, in the Johnson's Paint Trophy, which is a competition for League One and League Two clubs only for their chance to win a trophy. They've recently allowed Premier League under 23 sides to play in it, which kind of diminishes the competition and the value of it. So you could, in theory, have a similar situation where these clubs are resting their big players in Premier League games to save them for the European Super League. Now, that obviously then weakens the brand of the Premier League and the Football League overall. So you're then running a risk of the game not progressing, clubs not receiving more money, and it being harder to get nearer to those bigger clubs financially.
Yeah.
Now let's say what the Premier League and UEFA and all the leagues threatened is that if they went ahead with this, that they would be booted out of the leagues. The top six, the big clubs, are such a big presence globally, brand-wise, that they bring in so much money to the Premier League, and therefore the Football League is kind of a trickle-down effect. Now, not as much as they probably should do according to the Football League, but they do. They are the big pull factor for any kind of advertising money, and it's what's helped the Premier League grow, that these super clubs effectively now bring in all this money. If they're not there, the question then becomes, can those 14 other Premier League clubs sustain the league in terms of a branding exercise and funding to bring in that money that can help them develop as clubs without the big six? So you've got two things there straight away that really do harm. Either way you look at it, they harm not just the Premier League clubs, but then as a knock-on effect, all the way down the football pyramid, it would be a seismic shift in terms of the growth of the game. And with COVID anyway, a lot of League One, League Two clubs have struggled with funding, and many still could go under when this is all done. But if you're then taking out or playing a weaker side of those top clubs, the impacts are going to be far, far worse. And I think you'd see a lot of clubs end up going under, especially towards the bottom of the English Football League.
Yeah. So it's more, it's not just, transfers. It's about the sponsorship payments. Sponsors may not want to pay as much money if the Premier League doesn't appear to be as, I say, entertaining as it currently is.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, the Premier League is considered by most, if not all, as to be the biggest league, in the world. It brings us so much money, and if you take away those big assets, and then you've got another league that's above that everyone wants to sponsor the big brands, then you're going to lose out on so many opportunities and money in the future, and the Premier League suddenly becomes a kind of secondary. It's secondary to the Champions League anyway, but then the Champions League could cease to exist as it is, and less sponsors are going to want to put money into branding if these clubs are playing kind of backup teams to protect themselves for the Super League.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay.
Not good.
Yeah, no. Doesn't sound very good, no. My next question, you sort of touched on it on your intro about the 12, 15 teams that are safe from relegation from that Super League. And you mentioned that there hadn't been much information about what happens to the rest of the teams in that league, getting promoted or relegated. But was it sort of discussed as to where they would come from? Would they come up from like the Premier League and places like that, or would it, could they come from any league? I don't, was there any information about that kind of where these other teams would come from to enter this Super League?
There wasn't really a lot. You can look at it from a couple of ways. That obviously, if there's 6 English teams in there anyway, it's probably less likely that England get many places. Similar to the Champions League now, because England is considered the best league, we end up getting 4, potentially 5 places, whereas lesser leagues will only get 1 or maybe even a qualifying spot. But this is more of a hunch than anything else. I think it's a pretty solid guess that whichever leagues or clubs have the most money or would potentially be able to at some point join that league, those would be the ones that they would target, or the bigger value leagues. So again, at the minute you have clubs in Belgium and all across Europe that can get into the Champions League and play against these big boys. I think if the Super League went ahead, I think it's very unlikely that those lesser clubs like your Shakhtar Donetsk in Ukraine and stuff like that would have any shot of getting into this competition, because they'd only want the best of the best. So even though they're saying there's 5 teams that could rotate in, it would probably be the same old big clubs that haven't quite made the cut for this. So it's difficult. Again, obviously, the ins and outs of that weren't quite discussed, but I think, it would go to the teams that or the leagues anyway, the league consider the biggest market and what they can make the most money out of, which kind of boils down to obviously what the whole point of the league is, really.
Right. So it's a bit annoying that they haven't given the full details.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't get a chance, did they?
No, they haven't. No, it doesn't sound like it. No. So this one's a bit more. This one might be a bit more of a controversial question, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you think that there's a potential that if the 6 teams get booted out of the Premier League, that it could make the Premier League a bit more competitive? If there are no teams to dominate due to having much larger budgets than all the other teams in the league, does it level the playing field a bit?
Yeah, 100%. I think that obviously, as it was standing, or as it could still stand, we don't know 100% at this moment, that those teams, let's say it goes ahead and the Premier League and UEFA are true on their word and they're kicked out of the Premier League, that then suddenly you've got this. You do have the kind of tier above the pack, as it were, and your Evertons that are always knocking on the door, and your Leicester in recent times, obviously they've won a league. So I still think you'd have teams that are stronger.
Yeah, you would still have that to a degree. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I was looking at, actually interested in, I think it was Bleach Report on Instagram. They put up a post of Premier League winners without the top 6 over recent years. I think Everton would have won it 3 times, but you also in there had obviously Leicester, who did win it. But you had Burnley that finished, I think, 7th behind the big 6 one year, so they would have won it. Southampton, really? I think 2011, 2012, they would have won it. I think Leicester would have picked up a couple. Wolves in 18-19, as they changed their Twitter bio too. So you're seeing clubs that are not only like Wolves, I think that was the season they came up. It might have been the season after. But it shows you, and I mean, Sheffield United last year were doing really well right to the end. So it shows you that things break right for you, and those teams did go. You have a far, far easier chance of actually winning the Premier League than you did before. So I think it would definitely increase competition in that sense. I still think you'd see teams then like your Evertons and your Leicesters and the more financially well-off clubs and the more stable clubs that are pumping quite a bit of money in each year. They would separate themselves a little, but I do think you'd see a lot of kind of random winners every few years, which would be exciting.
I suppose you've also there's the dream of looking at it, isn't there, at the moment, that even if these big 6 did go, the Premier League would still have the money to pay to all the positions that they are. So all these, if everyone bunches up, all these, these teams would get more money from them going as well. So I don't know. Like I said, I thought it might have been a bit of a controversial question because nobody wants them to leave. But is there a potential benefit if they were? And we talked about it earlier about, does it make the league less ideal for sponsors? But if it turns out to be way more competitive and you've got, each season the top 3 is different and a different winner almost every year, that to me is a much more competitive and entertaining league, type sport to watch than something like Formula One, where it's the same team winning every year. When you look at Formula E, they've had like every team this year's scored points. They've had like 17 different winners of races. It's a far more competitive, sport because the playing field is leveled out. So that's exactly why I thought it was worth asking that question, because it seems that would be one of the benefits to this. But I'm not trying to suggest that I think that's what should happen. But I was just trying to sort of look at every level of what could happen here.
No, I do agree. I think as well that if you speak to a lot of football fans, and admittedly they are more the teams they support are in the Football League and the Championship and stuff, but a lot of people will say that they prefer almost watching the Championship every year because it's so random. I know you have teams that are big, like Norwich have gone down and come back up, but every year it feels like the top 6 is different. Every year the bottom 3 or 4 are different. I mean, you do have that the increased sense of competition. I think if the fans do stand by the reaction that they've showed to this, and that did happen, that they wouldn't watch it as much, maybe as a neutral, I think, like Adam said earlier, but I think they would then still keep watching the Prem, and then if suddenly you have a really exciting league where anything can happen any year, it's a whole new blank page of what could be possible potentially. So I think it's definitely a fair question and one that would lead to interesting consequences.
The next one is about the players of these 6 English teams that are supposedly part of this Super League, and I wanted to get your thoughts on whether you think they knew about this and if they were able to vote on whether the club was to join this Super League or not.
I think that really no. Like, I think obviously when you're a business owner and you're making decisions and it's your business, and in theory these players are your employees and stuff like that, but an MD isn't going to ask probably, say, someone that isn't either senior management or above how they make a business decision. And I think you look at, there was reports that after the Burnley game, Ed Woodward had a meeting with the Man United players, and they all kind of voiced their displeasure with what had happened, that they weren't consulted. They found out kind of the same time everyone else did on Twitter that they thought their manager had been thrown under the bus. I think Harry Maguire was quite outspoken about how unacceptable it was. And I mean, you're seeing players like today, like Kevin De Bruyne came out, Pep Guardiola came out and had his interview cut short by Man City staff about talking out against it. Luke Shaw put quite a long thing up. There was a few others. I know he wasn't part of it, but Podence from Wolves put a story up, and both Bruno Fernandez and João Cancelo, who are part of those clubs, also shared it and kind of showed their support. So all indications point to that not only the players didn't know, but I don't think many, if any, of the managers knew. And I was listening to a podcast earlier on The Guardian, and one of the journalists there reckoned that in these kind of decisions that the owner and the CEO or the chairman or whatever make the decisions, and then even other members of the board aren't necessarily consulted. So I think that the players have been totally blindsided by it and been put in a really, really tough position. But yeah, you never know, but I'd be very surprised, I think, if players were consulted on this.
Yeah, it from what's coming out in, like say, in social media and in some of the interviews, it does appear that they really didn't know. So do you think we're likely to, are we likely to see players leave those 6 teams if it goes ahead, even if it didn't go ahead, or could players want to, to leave those teams just the way it's been managed? But if it did went ahead and we saw players wanting to leave, can they, or are they stuck by the contracts that they have?
Well, this is the really, really interesting thing, because I was speaking to my housemate about this and where it leaves you contractually, and you're contracted by your club to play games, but doesn't necessarily specify. So in theory, I suppose that your contract would carry on as is. So you probably don't really you can't kind of just say, well, I'm not playing anymore because you're under contract. But then you could argue that the terms of your contract have completely changed. And there's, I imagine, no clauses in most, if not all, of these players' contracts that say anything about this level of change, and things like that if they did honour the contract, potentially they wouldn't be able to represent their country, for example, or play in other competitions and stuff. So is that contract then voided? I think it's a really, really interesting question. Leaving, I'm not sure, because I think that the way this league is set up, and they said that, I think JP Morgan funding it and straight away sending loans of 6 billion out to the clubs. They reckon there was rumours of 3.5 billion support packages for the founding clubs, 400 million for just accepting the invitation, which means that to those star players they want to keep, they'll go, we will pay you whatever you want. And I think, as we all know, money does talk. So then, even if some players wanted to leave, I think the high profile ones, they'd make them an offer that is very, very hard to turn down. Some players may, especially like a Harry Kane, for example, that is England captain, would he take money that he could get elsewhere? I know it'd be astronomically more, but would he want to sacrifice being the England captain potentially? So it's a tough one. I think that the contract situation is really interesting, because I don't think anyone really knows how that would happen. But if, let's say, the contracts were honourable, and it was found that they were right, would players walk away? I think the top players would be offered so much money, as in like a ridiculous sum of money, to the point where they'd say, "This is even if I play for 5 years, my family forever will be rich. So, do I want to walk away from that opportunity?" It's a hard one. I think if I had to decide on either side, I'd say most of the players, even if they voice their displeasure, would probably stay and take that money, because I do think it would be a ridiculous fee.
Yeah, it's interesting. I suppose for some of them, it might depend on whether their contracts specifically mention names of leagues and competitions. So whether they talk about if we get to the Champions League and you play for us in the Champions League, you're going to get this amount of money extra on top of the baseline. It depends how much detail their contracts go into, I suppose. But yeah, it's really interesting as to what could happen there, because like you say, they're all talking out about it, and whether they stick to that or not, regardless of how much money, and do then fans start questioning the integrity of that player for what they've said? They've come out when it was all happening, and then they've actually decided to stay in it when you get the impression that they don't want to do it. So it raises all sorts of questions. I think. So you mentioned it a bit there about expelling teams and players from other competitions, and I heard something about the Premier League does have a line, doesn't it, about teams not being able to join other leagues. But is this can they legally do these sort of sanctions, and do you think they would actually happen?
This is, again, one of the things that I was particularly interested in reading and tried to kind of read more into, because, for example, UEFA kind of came out and were claiming that they would ban players from the European Championships, World Cup qualifiers, domestic leagues, World Cups, everything, and sue any team that signed up 50 to 60 billion. Now, to me, without having have seen as of yet any of the base for that sounds like scare tactics. And I think that because FIFA kind of UEFA put out a very, very strong statement with all of this on and basically hammering it straight away. FIFA put out a statement that did voice its displeasure, but you could feel it was much weaker than UEFA's. And I do think that trying to ban a player from playing at their international level just because they're contracted to a team and they had no control over it, I think, if I had to guess, that if that went to a very high sports arbitration court or something like that, that it would be found to be kind of discriminatory. I think that in terms of the Premier League and stuff like that, I think they'd have more recourse to do it because, again, it's their league. They can kind of decide how it's done. And if these clubs decide to play in something that threatens the existence of that league, I think they have recourse to not necessarily ban specific players, but ban clubs, so therefore those players, if that makes sense. I think I think things like the World Cup and stuff, I'd be surprised. I mean, it could happen again, but I don't think we've really seen anything like this before. The nearest thing that I can think of is, I don't know if they still do it, but the England rugby team, there was a big thing about a lot of players going over to France to basically get more money at a club level. And a lot of players were banned for a while from playing for the England team, but that was a decision taken by the England team. And it's not necessarily saying they're banned, they just weren't considered for selection. So there are ways around it. But yeah, in terms of an all-out ban at international level and World Cups and stuff, it's tough to see, but again, you don't know. You don't know, I suppose. But yeah, I think probably domestic leagues, those clubs, I think probably would get booted out because it would, potentially kill the leagues. International, not quite as convinced.
An interesting one. Like you say, it all comes down to the legality of it, what they're trying to do. But like you say, there's way around it, isn't it? In just terms of if the teams just go, well, we're just not going to select you. End of. I mean, there's nothing to stop them from doing that, is there? Really, I wouldn't have thought.
Exactly. All it takes though is then let's say all the nations are doing the same thing, and then Spain go, actually, everyone else has banned all their best players. Yeah. Let's quickly slip them back in before the World Cup, and then they go and walk it. So
it's true.
But it's interesting. It's another one of those things that football was not meant to be, but one of those things that would be settled in a courtroom, as with a lot of this is, which kind of speaks to how much of anti-football it is in its essence.
Yeah. So this next one, you may struggle to answer purely on your opinion on the matter, but we'll give it a go. So one thought I had about was the announcement of it. I was wondering if there was a way of approaching it in a slightly different manner. Could they have done things differently that would have changed the public response to have not been as bad as it was? So to sort of show that there are other legitimate reasons for creating this Super League, other than the ones we're just the negative ones that we're being shown in the media regarding about it just being about money.
Yeah, That is a tough one.
I mean, if you genuinely think there is none, you just say that, because I haven't seen anybody come out to say what other reasons there are for this. So I'm really interested to get your thoughts on it.
I think there's definitely better ways they could have done it. I think that obviously when you're in a global pandemic and there's going to be a lot of financial hardship, well, there has been, and there's going to be more on everyone and every business, that then you're coming out and kind of announcing the formation of a multi-billion-pound Super League, especially taking it on a micro-level example, that Arsenal were going to let go their mascot because they said they couldn't afford to pay him, and we're going to let go a load of staff because they couldn't afford to pay them. But then they're signed up for this kind of Super League where obviously money is everything. So I think that the optics of that in itself are bad. I think the fan reaction would have been the same. I really do. I think whenever they were going to go for this, it was going to be absolutely chastised. I think that Florentino Perez, the Real Madrid and would-be chairman of the Super League, coming out today and saying effectively that we're trying to save football. He said that 16 to 24-year-olds are not interested in football at the minute, which, I mean, speak to any 16 to 24-year-old, that's not the case at all. I think that they've just handled it terribly PR-wise, but I think it's a terrible PR move anyway. I think that the only way that this comes out any better is that if they somehow manage to get around the table with FIFA and UEFA and say, we're doing this, but we want to make it work with you guys and come out as a united front, that would probably make it easier and a bit more integration, as opposed to being like, we are breaking away and effectively leaving you away from FIFA in the dark about it for a long time, because these negotiations haven't just happened overnight. Again, how that's possible, especially with UEFA, when this is a replacement for the Champions League, I don't know how that works, but that's the only way I think they could have come out and saved any kind of face. But yeah, the combination of that has been happening clearly for years behind closed. I mean, I saw an interesting thing. It was Chelsea had paused the extension or the rebuilding of their stadium in 2018 for money, for monetary reasons. And it just kind of feels like they were waiting or potentially biding their time for this 400 million or whatever it was, accepting invite stimulus package to come in so they can kind of carry on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the optics of that alone are bad. And that, I mean, these proposals and contracts and everything must have been flying around for over a year at least, so potentially years. So the way it's been done in the dark, the way it's kind of the closed element of it is the inexcusable things from the fans' perspective, because sport is competition.
Yeah,
that's why we love it. So the fact that this, in its essence, is a money spinning league, that no matter your performance, you can't be relegated. No one can replace you because of money.
Yeah.
That would just never fly with football fans. It's a sport made by working class people, and these clubs have had success, and fans have built these clubs through their own money, through tickets, shirt sales. Working class locals built it originally in places like Manchester and Liverpool and stuff like that. So to then say, actually, now we're going to make it harder for you to get to games, we're not going to accept anyone being better than us, regardless of if you are better than us or not. But yeah, PR-wise, from the fans' perspective, I don't think it would have flown. But there are a couple of ways that they probably could have done it better. Is probably the best spin I can give them on that response, I think.
Yeah, because I was watching the BT guys after the semi-final game on Sunday, and I think Jake Humphries mentioned that the Premier League started as a breakaway league, but because it was open and you had that relegation and promotion aspect of it, it was taken up so much better than what's happening with this. So, but again, that's sort of history I don't really know. So I didn't, when he said that, I was like, oh, I really didn't know that. So it's quite interesting to hear that.
Yeah, so the Football League was all kind of connected, whereas they formed the Premier League because similar reasons, in honesty, similar reasons that it was a rebrand, it gives more money, it's easier to market, and it's worked. But I think Neville and Carragher on Monday Night Football summed it up really well, and they said football changes all the time. It has to keep people interested, to keep evolving, and to keep building it globally, domestically, whatever it may be. But one thing that has never changed about that is the fair competition. In theory, San Marino could go and win a Euros if they had the right player crop and all of that. In theory, Coventry City could go and win the Championship next year, get promoted, and then go win the Premier League. In theory, because it's open competition. The difference with this is it's saying no matter how bad we are or how good you are, you can't join this club because we're richer than you or aspire to be richer than you. And that is obviously the big no in many people's eyes.
Yeah. So, sort of carrying on that money theme, interestingly, I'd heard that some of the shares for these clubs went up when the news was dropped about this Super League. Now, surely that means there's a lot of people that think this is a good idea, or it just shows the system is broken in just favouring things that make money.
I think both are true. I think that if you're looking at it from a purely business perspective, if you know that these clubs are going to receive all this money, they're going to go into a place where they can't lose value because they can't get relegated. It's a much safer business model than when you can, in theory, get relegated and lose out on all the money that's being pumped into your club. I think it also shows, that the system is broken. I think that there is globally a big appetite for this. That's the issue. It's the home fans, the domestic fans that have pushed back on it so hard. I mean, for example, they have an international Champions Cup, I think it's called, which is effectively a pre-season friendly tour of Asia. But they get 90,000 fans there because, again, the Premier League and European football is such a global brand that these fans that watch it on TV from Asia, they get a chance to see these players. So for them, who have not as much of a grasp of the history and the importance of fair play in the divisions and won't even know really probably what the Championship or the Football League is, they just want to see these great teams play each other. They just want to watch it on TV for entertainment. They're not diehard generation to generation fans.
Yeah,
they're fans of the sport. And I think the best way to describe it is I'm quite a big American sports and NFL fan, and I've come into it quite late and love how it's set up. But it's set up in a franchise sense, whereas is effectively what the Super League would be. And I'm looking at it again from someone that have been to a London game and stuff here, but that just watches it on TV and loves the spectacle of it. I'm not someone that's gone and padded the pockets of the club I support to build them up. So that's where the issue comes in the sense of what this would do. It would make the clubs completely global and alienate their fan base, but they wouldn't care, the business owners, because they'd be making more money.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, like you say, if they go in the global route, they could end up bringing in teams from anywhere if they wanted to, I suppose. I mean, is there no, go on.
No, he's going to continue.
I was going to say, is there a way that we can try and compare this with if some European bank, should we say, went over to America to try and do something with one of their sports? You know, like, is it the baseball? They have the World Series, but it's only in American teams. Is there a way?
Yeah.
I don't know how to really sort of come up with a comparison way of creating something over on their turf, if you like, that would rile their fans up as much as what this has done to our home base fans. I haven't really thought about it long enough, but yeah.
Well, this is something that I actually did want to touch on, because the issue is this is their sports model, and again, it's no surprise that this was led by Glazier, who's American, and people that are fans of the franchise. But I mean, so if you look at America, so the NFL, which is the American football, the NBA, which is the basketball, the MLB, which is the baseball, they're all franchise sports. And about 100 years ago in the MLB, there used to be just loads and loads of minor league local teams. But again, there were separate markets, no promotion or relegation. And eventually those teams dried up to the point where you now just have obviously the set amount of teams you do and nothing underneath it apart from the feeder clubs that play in minor league. The NFL, for example, is again a franchise league. In the history of the league, teams have moved complete locations and rebranded 11 times.
Wow.
So if this happened, the European Super League, and these franchises are set. This franchise system is set out to spread the markets. So, for example, you won't have many teams in the same place and stuff like that. So the IPL, they don't have like two teams in Mumbai, for example, or two teams in Delhi. They spread it out to spread the markets to make more money. So if you did this with the European Super League, and suddenly you've got Russian owners, Qatari owners, American owners, everything like that, and you've got two teams in a tiny part of England in Manchester and two teams in London, you're telling me that those owners wouldn't eventually go, actually, you know what? If I move this team to Paris, because there's no Paris team, I can earn so much more money by marketing it and making it a Paris team. So this is then the problem that it comes to, is that once they've done this, there is no kind of local tie anymore. It becomes global, and it will become more and more global to the point where the owners, like they do in American sports and every other franchise sport, can move their teams around at will and still know that they can take it into a bigger, better market, whatever's better for the business.
Yeah.
So this is how they do their sport, and it works for them because it's a massive country, but it's had many poor ramifications for fans of local teams. The St. Louis Rams 2 years ago moved to LA and became the LA Rams. They used to be the LA Rams a long time ago anyway, but they lost their team. They don't have an NFL team anymore in St. Louis. So it's gone. They'll never get it back. The Oakland Raiders, who are one of the most passionate, great fan bases in the NFL, they last year also moved. And that team doesn't have a fan. They don't have their team anymore. Now they can follow them and support them when it's there, but their owners have said, we don't want your fanship. We want someone else's because it's worth more money. So what do you do then?
That's mad, isn't it? Yeah, to think that they can just do that. And can you imagine that here? I'm surprised there isn't riots in America when they do that, because I definitely think there would be here. But yeah, I suppose that does make this proposal that bit more almost scary from a point of view of the home fan base, really. So
yeah, I think that in America, I think the reason why it works is, one, because it's always been that way, and two, that because they have four really big sports. I mean, the NFL and the NBA are kind of the big two, but baseball's really big there. But whereas I think another thing that's backfired on someone like Glazier, who's an American, and the other people that thought the fans probably wouldn't quite react as harshly as they did, is that you have things like cricket and rugby in the UK, and you have things like handball in Spain, and you have these other sports, but Europe is football and football crazy, and it's just football. Nothing comes close. So it's not like you can move a football team away and it's okay because we've got a baseball team here. So it's annoying, but it's not the end of the world. I'll just support them. It's not like that here.
No,
if you took Man City out of Manchester, what sport do the Man City fans have? I mean, rugby league maybe, and like that's so tiny in comparison. And yeah, so I think that's one of the ways why it has kind of worked. And there is still outrage, but not obviously to the extent that would be here. One of the reasons it has worked in America, and also one of the things that the owners of this league really have underestimated, and they would have known there'd been a backlash, but obviously the extent that there's been that has led to the potential already breakup is definitely a big part of that.
Yeah. So you just touched on the breakup, and that brings me into my final question. If this Super League is cancelled, what do you think the teams, so we'll just focus on the English teams and the Premier League, what do you think they're going to get in terms of a consequence for just being associated with this league, even though it never went ahead?
That again is so tough, because the Premier League and UEFA are now in obviously a much better spot than they were, but a really tough spot in that they can't allow this to potentially happen in the future. And I compare this type of thing to almost the nearest thing I think of the Scottish referendum, which is quite strange. But it didn't go ahead. It was voted against. And now you've seen it kind of constantly building to the point where it's building again, where we are in the next few years going to have another referendum on Scottish independence. And the people that push the agenda, even if they get the no, they will keep going and keep going until eventually it's a yes. And again, UEFA, while all this was going on, had drawn up big reforms to the Champions League as it is. So it's going to turn into effectively one big league, and more money is going to go to the bigger clubs and stuff like that, which again is pandering to these big clubs that this might not have worked now, and they might be slightly happy to get more from UEFA and the Champions League in terms of the money and what they want in the short term. But in 5-10 years, that won't be enough anymore. And they want more, and they want more, and they want more. And I think that this is why it was so important that this wasn't allowed to go ahead. Again, we don't know yet, but it looks like it's not going to go ahead. That you have to just nip this in the bud now. And that's where, again, that FIFA, UEFA, the Premier League have to really, really hit down hard on this and show that it can't happen, because even if they give them an inch, in this sense, that eventually 5, 10, 15, 20 years, they will try and do it again, because again, it's in their financial interest. Now, in terms of but then obviously, again, so as I was kind of saying to the guys earlier on, UEFA then a bit of a bind, because let's say they ban these clubs from the Champions League next year. That straight away means that next year, guaranteed, less people watch, because there's more fans of those big clubs, and it's more interesting when you see the big clubs playing each other. And advertisers will either want to pull out or pay less than what they did this year, because they're not getting the bigger teams, the bigger brands, the bigger audiences. So how much can UEFA do in that sense without effectively handicapping themselves for a year? So I think that it has to be a big fine for the clubs financially, because that's the way you can kind of hurt the owners without as much hurting the fans and the players. If you deduct these clubs' points or transfer bans and stuff, which I think transfer bans are slightly better than deducting points, or banning them from competitions, at the end of the day, the fans and the players still suffer. And they're the ones that have had anything to do with this. The only way you can kind of get at and really hurt the owners without hurting the other people is by hefty fines. And I think someone was saying earlier that we should run these people out. And we've seen, as a bit of half-breaking news, Ed Woodward has resigned, and I've read that it's actually not confirmed, but they reckon that Angeli as well from Juventus could have resigned, but I've also seen reports pushing back on that. But yeah, it's how do you push these people out? In Germany, they have a model where 51% of the club must be owned by the fans. So again, this is why the German clubs pulled out, because they could get run out of their ownerships.
Yeah.
How are you going to convince Qatari, Russian, American billionaires after this to relinquish power to fans and people? I mean, it's just, I'd love it to happen, but I just don't see how that's possible. So the only way that realistically I can see a sensible outcome of this is to put hefty fines and potentially a transfer ban in place. Again, transfer ban does upset the fans and players to an extent a bit, but I think it's almost collateral damage. And I think that you could definitely see a ban, especially in something like the Champions League, because we have been very outspoken. I think the Premier League wouldn't do that. But it's tough. I don't know how you pick up these pieces. I think that the fans feel so let down by these clubs. My housemates, I've got 2 United fans, an Arsenal fan, a Chelsea fan, and they're all gutted, like really, really gutted about this, because it's just all the principles of Liverpool, you'll never walk alone. United, the United way.
I heard that one as well, and it's like, it's totally right, isn't it? Like, they're supposed to be the fan club, all this coming together, and then they're just gone a completely different tangent. It just makes you question. Like, it's all about the owners, isn't it, and what they want really, and it does seem to be it's just a way to give them more financial security.
It is, yeah, and I'm really interested to see how then the next steps. Again, let's say if we have to say if at the moment, if this club falls apart, what the sanctions will be, because it will. I'm very confident it will be heavy in some sense, because it has to be, because they have to stamp this out. It cannot happen. Yeah. But how they manage to balance penalising the owners and the people responsible for this, the very, very, very tiny 0.0001% of the people that were responsible for this happening, and not further damaging the fans and the players, will be a really, really interesting thing that I don't think will come out anytime particularly soon. I think it needs a lot of thought.
It does.
and we will see. But yeah, it will be interesting, and I hope they get it right because this debacle cannot happen again.
No. Do you think there's a bit of, with the fans element, you talk about like not upsetting the fans. Do you think there'll be a bit of, like you say, everybody's devastated by this, and they'll back whatever, sanctions or whatever gets put against these clubs, no matter what they are? Do you think the fans will go, yeah, you deserve it. I don't care if it's going to affect, the Champions League or the Premier League for next year or the year after. You totally deserve what's come this way as a team. And yeah, it's hard on the players, but I think a lot of the fans might go with it, regardless of what the sanctions and penalties might be.
I agree. I think my housemates that are big club fans are kind of saying, I almost hope we lose our next couple of games, which is obviously a weird feeling for them. I think that if it came to that, they would accept it, obviously, and be like, you know what, that's deserved. We take our medicine, but also they are still being, whether they agree with it or not, they're still being punished even more after finding out of the clubs that they've spent their lives and potentially their dads and their dads have loved. And again, to touch back on that Man United and Liverpool especially are working class clubs that built up English football and this historic rivalry and all these morals that they claim to stand for. And I have no doubt that the players that play there and the former players share that passion. But then to find out that the one that's calling all the shots doesn't see it like that at all and has no regard for those values is a very bitter pill to swallow, and one that I don't think is going to go away anytime soon in terms of negative feeling towards those people. So what happens in the aftermath is going to be one to watch, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we'll leave it there for my questions. I think we've gone quite heavy on this subject for the last sort of 40 minutes now. So I think you've got a little bit that hopefully will lighten the subject a bit to finish off.
So yes, after some very heavy stuff and something that I think has brought all of us down as football fans, but there are fragments of hope now shooting with the talk of that Chelsea have put the paperwork in to withdraw, that City are going to withdraw, that Atleti are looking to withdraw, that Barca want to withdraw, and that there's going to be a meeting tonight to decide the fate of the Super League. I thought that regardless of this, the one thing that is inevitable is fantasy football. And one thing that brings us all together more than anything else is fantasy football. And one thing that will still happen next year, regardless of this stupid league or anything else, is fantasy football. So I thought, let's get straight back on the job. Let's get some scouting in and look at what the league could look like if the ESL did happen, because if they go, good riddance.
This is exciting. I like the look of this.
So first of all, the top 30. So I wanted to take the top 30 players at the moment. And again, obviously, this isn't a completely fair balance, but just a bit of fun. And the top 30 players currently and who manages them and working that out. So first of all, the top 30, as you can see there. So we've got Fernandez, Kane, Salah, Son, Bamford, Martinez, Rashford, so on. And I've highlighted them in the colour of the manager that owns those players. So then, if I go on to my next, we can look at who owns the most of those players, the places that those players play, and I've worked out a point system of obviously just adding up the points of those players and ranking a table based on that top 30. So obviously Tom is doing very well.
Yeah.
He has 6 players in there, 8, 10. Will, as expected, with the 1, 2, and 6. I mean, carrying him to an extent. And then Suchek in there at 22, which is interesting. Tolly with 4. Tolly again. I think that kind of sums up Tolly's team. Well-rounded and plenty of players that are doing it, but no one that's quite cracking that top 10 huge point scorers. But I mean, it's obviously served him very well. Lawrence actually did surprise me for being up there. But again, 4 and 7. Rashford has really, really crept up that point scoring table, and Cresswell's done really well for him. Then myself, slightly disappointed, but mid-table, I think just about sums it up. relatively disappointing, but there we go. Adam, I have no idea how he's actually up here with 14, 16, and 20. I think it speaks to the rest of his team. Jim, probably about where I expected him to come. Vardy kind of holding it all together for him, and Mane. This was also done before the Liverpool game on Monday. George, Dallas, I could not believe, is not only his top point scorer, but 10th overall.
Yeah.
That, to me, seems completely insane, but I think a lot of that helped with an 18-pointer, I think it was last week. And then yourself, Gundogan, obviously, again, he's done you absolute bit since you picked him up, and good to see JWP in there, big fan of him. And then, yeah, poor old Rich. I mean, that does not make great viewing.
No.
A fair bit behind everyone, and it's a goalkeeper.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had any immediate thoughts on that collection of rabble.
No, I don't think so. I think it's sort of, I think the top is sort of in line with what the league's looking like at the moment, doesn't it, in our league table? So, but yeah, no, it's interesting. I'm looking forward to what you're going to show me next. That's what I'm waiting for.
Exactly. I think, just show that obviously if you have players high up, then the big players, if you have them, generally you're going to do well, regardless if you have some other stuff going on. But yes, I thought that this top 30 could look an awful lot different if the European Super League happened. And I want to see what proper footballers would be in this top 30, because if they go, they go. We don't need them. Good riddance.
Yeah.
So the proper top 30 would look a little something like this. So Bamford would be point scorer number 1, and we'd have a goalkeeper second highest scorer, which blows my mind. The fact that then Dallas not only is 10, but in this would be the 4th overall point scorer is madness. I mean, you'd have 3 Leeds players inside the top 10. And the Grealish and co.
Wow, yeah.
Of course. Interestingly, Neto, I know he's injured, and hence why he hasn't been picked up. Obviously, Neto is a free agent sitting at 15th. And then if you get towards the bottom, it makes interesting reading. I mean, West Brom, if I'm correct, West Brom have 1 player now in here. Oh, no, sorry, 2 players. 2 players, take that back. Pereira and Johnston. Palace, Zaha creeps in there. And Sheffield United, even without any of the top 6 players playing, don't have a single player that would come in the top 30 points, which I think just speaks volumes of their season.
Yeah.
But anyway, without further ado, I will then reveal how this would impact that little table I showed last time and the movement. So actually, Will, who said he would be screwed overall if all the top players left, in this, obviously, again, I don't know what it'd be like if it was the full squads, but in this scenario, he actually goes up a place first. I managed to sneak in Harrison, Patricio, Target, and Wilson into this to get 4th. That put me up 3 places. You have had an absolute crazy surge.
Yeah.
With the likes of Maddison, Schmeichel, and Mings jumping in there. Tom, one of the hardest hit, obviously, as expected, but still actually doing better than I thought than he would do. Tolly, drops a couple, but again, he hasn't really, apart from Rafinha, hasn't really had much help in that regard. But yeah, Rich with a big surge, points-wise, but not necessarily, obviously, place-wise. And then, Lawrence, which surprises me, the hardest hit, with only Cresswell and Zaha in there, which I did find very interesting. But yeah, just a bit of light fun as the first part of my segment to look into how the ESL could potentially affect who the top players are.
Yeah, very interesting.
But yeah, I thought I'd finish with, again, plenty of talk, some few stats thrown in there, but I'm going to finish with something that I think is genuinely lighthearted, but one that everyone needs to be watching for next year. And that is the new cheap players. So obviously, as I think Tolly coined the term, actually, cheap players are players that you need to have in your team if you want to do well, and they're players that are just guaranteed point machines. And I've a combination of players this year that are cheap players last year that were cheap players, and one that has been a bit of a historic cheap player, and found a comparison that is not going to be part of the Super League, as these cheap players will be gone. So, first of all, Kevin De Bruyne. 2 injuries, but is just a wide-regarded cheap player because he plays in the best team by miles, takes set pieces, takes penalties, incredible footballer.
Yep.
And I was thinking to myself, who is a similar player that seems to carry their team on their back, incredibly creative, set piece whiz, and there was really only one player that could possibly fill these shoes, and it's
I
your
like
boy,
it.
James Ward-Prowse.
Yes.
A set piece whiz. I think only David Beckham has scored more free kicks from him in Premier League history. Has exploded this year point-wise from what he was, and should be at the top of anyone's anti-ESL list.
See, I was getting ridiculed for saying I was going to put him as my top pick for next year. Big brain move from me here.
Big brain time. Exactly. So yeah, so I think that was quite a nice and easy comparison. But actually as well, yeah, only 1 point behind Bruyne this year. I know injuries and stuff, but
yeah,
pretty good going. So next of all is obviously Mohamed Salah, who has been a widely regarded cheap player for the last 3 odd years. I wouldn't say a down season. He's still third in the point scoring, but maybe would have expected more from the start of the year. And I was thinking, who's a player, and this does pain me to say, who's a player that beats people for fun, that scores goals, that plays out wide, and that also loves to dive more than any player, I think, in Premier League history, according to Tolly. And there was only one, and it was Jack Grealish.
What is he doing there?
That was one of his most infamous dives. But yeah, I mean, fair play. Scored a hell of a lot of points this year.
Yeah.
Insanely creative, and he would be very, very high up my draft board if no top 6 teams were in there. Then our leading point scorer, Bruno Fernandez, does it all. Assists, scores, takes penalties, has kept not a bad amount of clean sheets as well as picking up those little extra points here and there. And then this was a tough one because although there are players that have scored points, I was like, who is a direct comparison? And this may seem odd to some, but he's had a bit of a resurgence of late. He takes penalties. He can't stop scoring goals. He can't stop assisting. And there's only one guy that I think could potentially fill this man's shoes. And it's Jesse Lingard.
Oh, right.
9 goals in 10 games.
Yeah.
And he has had one of the most bizarre Premier League resurgences I've ever seen, because the last season he played for United, I believe he got, I don't know if it was a goal or assist, but he got a goal or an assist on the last game of the season to save him from going an entire season without a single goal or assist. And he's now scored 9 goals in his last 10 games. So he is on fire, playing for a very good team. And yeah, Jesse Lingard is the new Bruno Fernandez.
You heard it here first.
Heard it here first.
Yeah.
DraftCast exclusive. I think I have 6 of these. So, Harry Kane. I mean, yeah. What to say about this guy? England captain, certified goal machine. Is going to break, well, if he wasn't leaving for the ESL, would have broken Shearer's long-standing Premier League goal record. And then I was trying to think of players that are very good goal scorers, that play on a team that threatens to be good, but always kind of disappoints. Very good in the air, very good with the ball at his feet also. And it was Dominic Calvert-Lewin. He's been very remarkable this season. It was a good pickup, actually, by Tolly, because he'd scored a few goals before this year, but not many. But yeah, he'd also be one of the first strikers off the board, especially playing for a team like Everton, who surely if the top 6 left would have to finally win something.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair comparison.
Yeah. So my second to last one is Trent. Not quite done as well this year. Better second half of the season, but an incredible attacking player, playing in a great team, takes set pieces. Not great at defending, but an assist and to an extent goal merchant, and has kept a fair few clean sheets. And there's only one player that came to mind here straight away, and it was Aaron Cresswell, who again kept a lot of clean sheets this year for a while before he got injured, was the top scoring defender in all of fantasy. Also whips in a corner very nicely. Doesn't do an awful lot of defending, but puts in a lovely ball. So yeah, Cresswell was that one. And I believe the next one is my last and the final bit from me today. And that is Sergio Aguero. And don't look at the points, because this guy is a certified fantasy legend. Has the most hat-tricks in Premier League history. Has played in arguably one of the best, most consistent Premier League teams over the years. And has been just the go-to fantasy striker apart from maybe Kane before this year.
Yeah.
I had to rack my brains and had to think, who is someone that could fill this man's shoes? Who is someone that can match, arguably, the legacy of the greatest striker that has ever played in the Premier League? And then it dawned on me, there was only one player that can fill this man's shoes. And it's Timu Pukki.
I was waiting for someone to come from the championship teams.
And I think I've given him a fair assessment of a points projection, because obviously he's not currently playing in the Premier League. I thought 1,463 points, which would, be probably, I think, just about the record for the most amount of points in a season.
Yeah.
This guy scores goals. He was handicapped in his first attempt in the Prem by just players not doing it around him. But now he has Emi Buendia and Cantwell raising their game more. I think it's a fair assessment to say he will score at least 45 goals next season.
It will be interesting to see. And that was one of my questions I was going to ask you about the tables of players, the top 30. Whether is there a championship fantasy game?
There is, I believe.
I was wondering if you could get the top players from that and compare the points and sort of shift that into our top 30 to see what players come from, coming up from the however many teams get promoted because of the ESL would fit into that top 30 players.
There is, I believe, fantasy football. I would have to dig it out, though, I think. I think I found it, but I'm not sure how I'd go about finding the top 30 because it's a much more budget website.
Yeah. No, don't worry. It's just what I was just thinking. It will be an interesting to see what happens with the teams that come up, and I presume they'll have to, if the ESL went ahead and all the teams that are supposedly joining went, the 6 teams, they'd have to bring up 6 teams from below, surely, or not, or not relegate those in the relegation zone at the moment.
I think that straight away probably not relegate anyone, bring up the teams, but I think they have a decision to make on whether they'd want to still do 20 teams or whether they potentially reduce it to 18 teams or something like that.
Yeah.
I think that'd be interesting. But I think, regardless of if this does happen or not, I think that championship players and getting the actual good ones that come up is almost arguably the most important thing about fantasy, because everyone knows that Mo Salah's good. Everyone knows Harry Kane's good. If you can find those players in the first few weeks of free agency that have come up from the championship that are actually good and hold on to them, you either have a lot of guaranteed points from someone you haven't even drafted, or you have a great trade piece that you can then work for players more consistently. So I would advise everyone to get their pencils and notepads out and watch the remainder of the championship football season and try and dig out a few gems.
Okay. That was good. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's been a little more lighthearted after some heavy football chat.
Yeah, and I think we'll try not to get drawn back into the ESL chat. I think our opinions on it have come across in the way that you've answered the questions and just the way that the way the conversation's gone. So I don't think we need to really put out a statement of our opinions. I think that's clear, as it would be for any football fan doing something like this. So I think all there is left to say is thanks for coming on, Jack. Thanks for having this conversation and bringing some expertise. I think you answered all the questions much better than I would have been able to. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you very much. If I could end on one slight point that's technically, is to do with the ESL, but something that I've been thinking about a bit introspectively, and as I said, this has all been quite heavy and quite down, but if you think about really what football is and why it's so good, it's watching a team that you care about with potentially your dad, your granddad, whoever it's passed down from generation to generation. You meet friends that are rivals of your team and you have that back and forth, that banter. And football's given me so much over the years in terms of family things, of friends, of obviously this podcast, meeting you guys, fantasy football, everything, that I think that whatever happens with all this stuff, that fortunately we have football's here to stay, regardless. It can change, it can shift, but football and all the great things it brings in life will still be here. So whatever happens with those teams, if they want to go, screw them. We will still have our game.
I agree. And my journey into football has been very different. My dad doesn't follow football. He's not interested in it in the slightest. So my, we talk about me supporting Saints. So that comes purely from the draft, from this league that we run. That's purely come from that. And I'm still in agreement with you, regardless of what happens with this ESL. If they go, I think football fans will especially the home fans, will flock to the Premier League more so than that ESL, and hopefully keep it as it is or make it stronger. So, but yeah, we just need to wait and see what happens over the next few days, I think, to see what announcements come, because we don't really fully know if it's going to go ahead or not. But I think you're right. Either way, fans have got to just back the home games, make sure they, even going and supporting your local teams is really important right now, regardless of what's going on, just because of the pandemic. So I think it does highlight, doesn't it, the importance of, you can call it grassroots football on those lower leagues, and making sure people support them just as much as they do those in the Premier League. I think, I've known a few people at work that support two teams, one that's a big club in the Premier League, and then someone in the Championship or someone lower. I think it's from my point of view, I think that's a value. I can't see why people would have anything against people doing that. It just shows.
Completely agree.
It's just showing your respect, isn't it, for all the different levels of football. So
yeah, football's for the fans and always will be.
Yeah, definitely. So again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for listening, everyone. We've rattled on for a good hour now, so I think we need to wrap it up. Again, thanks for coming on, Jack. Thanks for listening, everybody. This is the DraftCast, and remember, football is life. See you next time.